step into a tune with the rhythm of a walk.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Hollywood Remembers video. Today we're honoring the American stars we've recently lost, along with other beloved figures who have touched our lives around the world. Before we dive in, if this video resonates with you, we'd truly appreciate a like. It helps us continue sharing these heartfelt tributes with the respect and care they deserve. Thank you for your support. And now, let's begin. Blake Garrett, remembered fondly for his role in Zoando na Scola, was one of those rare young talents who brought laughter and warmth into family homes. As a child actor, he carried a natural charm that made audiences smile and reminded many parents and grandparents of the simple joy of watching television together with their loved ones. His performances reflected an innocence and energy that defined a generation of youthful entertainment. News of his passing at just 33 years old following a tragic accident in the United States on Sunday, 8, brings a profound sense of sorrow. It is always especially heartbreaking when a life once so full of promise is cut short. Yet, even in grief, we hold on to gratitude for the laughter he shared, for the memories he helped create, and for the moments of lighthearted escape he provided to viewers of all ages. For many in the 55-plus generation who witnessed the rise of young television stars and cherished programs that families could enjoy together, Blake's work represents a gentler chapter of entertainment. His legacy lives on in reruns, in shared stories, and in the affectionate recollections of those who watched him grow on screen. As we honor his memory, let us reflect on the joy he brought into our homes. If Blake Garrett's performances touched your heart or became part of your family's cherished moments, we invite you to share your memories and tributes. In remembering him together, we keep his spirit alive, with respect, gratitude, and enduring appreciation.
Jung Eun-woo, born Jung Dong-jin on April 10, 1986 in Incheon, South Korea, was a gifted actor whose quiet strength and expressive depth left a lasting impression on television audiences. Through memorable roles in beloved dramas such as One Well-Raised Daughter and The Return of Hwang Gun-bok, he demonstrated a rare ability to portray resilience, devotion, and emotional sincerity. His performances resonated deeply, especially with viewers who appreciate stories centered on family, perseverance, and heartfelt human connection. On February 11, 2026, the world bid farewell to him far too soon. His passing invites a moment of reflection, not only on the fragility of life, but on the enduring power of art. Jung Eun-woo brought authenticity to every character he portrayed, allowing audiences to see themselves, their struggles, and their hopes reflected on screen. For many in the 55-plus generation who cherish meaningful dramas rich in moral lessons and emotional depth, his work offered comfort and inspiration. Though his time was brief, his artistic legacy remains. The scenes he brought to life continue to echo with grace and dignity, reminding us that true talent leaves an imprint that time cannot erase. His dedication to his craft stands as a testament to discipline, humility, and passion. As we honor Jung Eun-woo's memory, let us celebrate the stories he helped tell and the emotions he so beautifully conveyed. If his performances touched your heart or became part of your cherished viewing moments, we warmly invite you to share your memories and reflections. In remembering him together, we preserve his legacy with gratitude, respect, and enduring admiration.
Clint Black is more than a country singer with a black hat and a steady baritone. He is a story about persistence, discipline, and the quiet determination required to build something lasting in a world that moves too fast. This is not a story about chart positions or award shelves. It is a story about becoming. Born in Long Branch, New Jersey, and raised in Houston, Texas, Clint Patrick Black grew up in a household where music was present, but not glamorous. His father loved country records. His mother valued stability and structure. There was rhythm in the home, but there was also responsibility. two forces shaped him. On one side, practical expectations: work hard, provide, stay grounded. On the other, emotional encouragement: sing, play, explore, express. Between discipline and dream, Clint found his identity. He picked up the guitar young, not as rebellion, not as fantasy, but as conversation. Music became the language he could speak fluently when words felt inadequate. In honky-tonks and small Texas stages, he learned something more important than fame. He learned timing. Country music in the 1980s was shifting. The polished pop country wave had softened its traditional edges, but something in Clint gravitated toward the roots: storytelling, steel guitar, emotional honesty. He noticed early that songwriting wasn't just performance, it was protection. If he could write his own stories, he controlled the narrative. If he could tell the truth in 3 minutes, he could build connection without spectacle. Talent for him wasn't glamour, it was survival. The breakthrough came in 1989 with Killin' Time. The song wasn't flashy, it wasn't loud, it felt lived in, authentic. The kind of record that older country listeners immediately recognized as sincere. The album that followed didn't crawl up the charts, it soared. 5 consecutive #1 singles. Their debut that felt less like an entrance and more like a declaration. Country traditionalism was not finished. Success came fast. Too fast, perhaps. Tour buses, award ceremonies, industry expectations, interviews asking him if he was the next big thing. But Clint's demeanor rarely shifted. He wasn't trying to become a celebrity personality. He was trying to remain a craftsman, and that distinction matters. Because early momentum in country music can create pressure, label demands, radio formulas, branding adjustments. Many artists bend, some break. Clint chose steadiness. He wrote or co-wrote most of his material. That decision gave him leverage, but it also gave him responsibility. When a song charted well, the credit was shared. When something underperformed, he felt it personally. Yet audiences, especially listeners over 45, saw something refreshing in him. He wasn't chasing trends. He wasn't reinventing himself every season. He represented continuity. In an era beginning to lean into spectacle, Clint Black embodied craft. Then came awards recognition, ACMs, CMAs, affirmations that his approach had not gone unnoticed. But what defined this first chapter of his rise wasn't trophies. It was trust. Country fans believed him. And belief is currency that cannot be manufactured. Still, rapid ascension brings invisible cracks. Touring schedules tighten, financial decisions expand. The business side grows more complex than the stage ever was. The success arrived, but the infrastructure behind it had to catch up. And as Chapter 1 of Fame unfolded, the real test was not whether Clint could write hits. It was whether he could remain whole inside the machinery of momentum. Because the story of Clint Black is not about overnight stardom. It is about maintaining selfhood when the world applauds loudly, and in the chapters ahead the applause will grow, so will the pressure. Success in country music can look effortless from the outside. The lights feel warm. The crowd sings along. The awards line the shelves. But behind that glow is structure, management, contracts, finances, loyalty, and trust. And structure, if not solid, can tremble. By the early 1990s, Clint Black was no longer just a promising newcomer. He was a defining voice of the neo-traditional country resurgence. Alongside artists like Garth Brooks and Alan Jackson, he represented a return to storytelling and steel-driven authenticity. His sound resonated deeply with listeners who longed for emotional clarity over polish. But with rapid ascent came complexity. Contracts that once felt simple became layered. Financial arrangements expanded. Touring intensified. And with greater visibility came greater expectation. From record executives, from promoters, even from fans. The success came quickly. The infrastructure behind it had to evolve just as fast. Clint found himself navigating disputes over management and financial control during the early part of his career. It wasn't a scandal. It wasn't explosive. It was something more common, the growing pains of a young artist learning how to own his business as well as his voice. The public saw platinum records. He saw paperwork. The tension wasn't dramatic. It was structural. When an artist becomes a brand overnight, Agreements made in earlier stages can become misaligned with present realities. Clint made the difficult choice to assert control over his career direction. It required patience. It required legal resilience. It required composure. Rather than turning conflicts into public spectacle, he handled them with quiet resolve. There were no theatrical interviews, no blame campaigns, just recalibration. For many artists, moments like these create bitterness. For Clint, it created clarity. He became more intentional, more attentive to ownership, more aware that longevity in country music depends not just on voice, but on vision. During this period, he continued releasing music that affirmed his place in the genre. Songs like A Better Man and Nobody's Home carried emotional depth without dramatic overreach. His writing matured. The early spark of success began to settle into craftsmanship, but something else was forming beneath the surface. Perspective. When the machine of momentum slows even slightly, a performer faces a question. Who am I without the climb? Clint's identity had always rested in songwriting, in being a narrator of lived experience rather than a manufactured image. That foundation insulated him during professional turbulence. The temporary instability in business matters did not uproot his creative center, and that matters deeply for audiences over 45 who understand something younger generations sometimes don't yet grasp. Character reveals itself when applause softens. The 1990s country scene grew louder, production values grew bigger, stadiums expanded. Yet Clint remained measured. His delivery rarely drifted into theatrical excess. Even on large stages, he sang like a man still speaking to one listener. That steadiness strengthened his bond with long-time fans. He wasn't trying to outshine. He was trying to endure. The legal disputes eventually settled, his footing stabilized, and with renewed control came renewed focus. What could have been a defining fracture became a defining lesson. The success had arrived rapidly, but now the structure was ready. And in the quiet after recalibration, Clint Black stood not just as a hitmaker, but as an artist who had learned the business of survival. The next chapter would not be about conflict. It would be about expansion, creatively, personally, and publicly. Because sometimes the most important victories are not the ones announced on award nights. They are the ones secured in silence. After weathering the structural storms of early fame, Clint Black entered a different phase of his career, not louder, not flashier, but steadier. And steadiness in country music is a rare and powerful currency. By the mid to late 1990s, the genre was evolving again. Production became glossier, arena tours became grander. Image sometimes began to compete with substance. Yet Clint remained anchored in the core values that shaped him. Songwriting first, character always. His marriage to actress Lisa Hartman Black in 1991 marked a personal turning point. Their duet, When I Said I Do, would later become more than just a chart success. It became a public reflection of partnership. Not spectacle, not drama, partnership. For many fans over 45, that mattered, because longevity in marriage, just like longevity in music, speaks to commitment. Clint didn't reinvent himself to stay relevant. He evolved without abandoning identity. Albums like One Emotion and Nothing But the Taillights proved he could adapt sonically while preserving narrative integrity. But behind the scenes, something subtle was shifting. Fame, once a rush, became background noise. Fatherhood redefined pace. When his daughter was born in 2001, priorities recalibrated again, touring schedules adjusted. Public life balanced more intentionally with private presence. The spotlight dimmed slightly. The life grew brighter. And here is where the narrative deepens. Because Clint Black's story is not about constant ascension. It is about rhythm, knowing when to accelerate and when to step back. Unlike artists who cling tightly to visibility, he allowed seasons to breathe. Country music changed dramatically in the 2000s. A younger generation of artists emerged. Production trends leaned toward crossover appeal. Yet Clint never publicly resisted the shift. He simply continued creating within his lane. There is maturity in that. For artists who began in the era of vinyl and cassette tapes, survival into the digital age requires humility. Streaming replaced record stores. Attention spans shortened. But for listeners who valued storytelling, Clint remained a reliable presence. And reliability builds legacy. He also expanded into television appearances and reality programming, including participation in shows like Celebrity Apprentice. These moments introduced him to newer audiences without compromising his identity. He appeared as himself, measured, thoughtful, competitive, but composed. The brand never became louder than the man. And that distinction cannot be overstated. Many performers reinvent personas to remain visible. Clint reinforced authenticity instead. There were no public meltdowns, no sensational controversies, no desperate pivots toward trend chasing, just music, family, craft. For longtime country fans, especially those who value consistency over drama, this approach deepened trust. They saw in Clint Black something increasingly rare, a professional who matured without unraveling. That does not mean the journey lacked challenge. Sales numbers fluctuated, industry shifts affected radio play, the competitive landscape intensified. But Clint's response was not reinvention, it was refinement. He leaned further into songwriting. He continued touring selectively. He strengthened his creative partnerships. Most importantly, he maintained self-respect. This is where many biographies lose tension, because stability isn't flashy. But in narrative terms, stability after turbulence represents growth. Clint Black was no longer proving himself. He was preserving himself. And preservation of voice, of marriage, of integrity may be the quiet triumph of his career. The next chapter will explore something even deeper: how legacy reshapes ambition when the early hunger evolves into reflection. There comes a moment in every enduring career when momentum is no longer the central goal. The climb has happened, the awards have been handed out, the arenas have filled. And what remains is a quieter question: what lasts? For Clint Black, this stage of life did not arrive with a dramatic announcement. It unfolded gradually. The touring schedule became more intentional. Recording projects became more selective. Public appearances carried the weight of history rather than urgency. This is not a story about fading relevance. It is a story about redefining purpose. By the 2010s, the country landscape had transformed yet again. Bro country anthems, digital marketing cycles, streaming algorithms. The business model looked nothing like the era that launched Killin' Time. Yet Clint did not appear displaced. He appeared seasoned. And there is dignity in seasoning. Instead of competing with younger trends, he leaned into heritage. Anniversary tours, acoustic sets, storytelling concerts where the space between songs mattered just as much as the songs themselves. Audiences didn't just want the hits, they wanted the memories attached to them. When Clint performed A Better Man, it wasn't simply a replay of a 1989 chart topper. It was a reminder of who listeners were when they first heard it. First loves, long drives, weddings, heartbreaks. Music became time travel. That is the privilege of longevity. In 2020, his induction into the Grand Ole Opry, country music's most sacred institution, formalized what many already knew. He was no longer just part of a movement, he was part of the foundation. Membership in the Opry is not about hype. It is about contribution. It says this voice shaped the genre. And for fans who grew up during the late 80s and early 90s resurgence of traditional country, that recognition felt deeply appropriate. Yet even here, Clint did not posture. He did not frame himself as a savior of traditionalism. He simply accepted the honor with humility, because legacy, when authentic, does not need to announce itself loudly. It reveals itself quietly. There were continued projects, albums like Out of Sane, where he maintained creative involvement and songwriting control. But these releases weren't chasing mass commercial validation. They were expressions of artistic continuity, and that is an important distinction. The hunger of early career asks, how high can I climb? The maturity of later career asks, what kind of man am I becoming? Clint's public identity increasingly centered on husband, father, mentor. Interviews grew more reflective, less about industry battles, more about gratitude and perspective. This evolution resonates strongly with audiences over 45 who understand that second acts are not measured in trophies, but in wisdom. The world did not need Clint Black to reinvent country music again. It needed him to remain himself. And remaining yourself, in an industry built on reinvention, may be the rarest achievement of all. But every legacy carries one final test. How do you measure success when the spotlight is softer, when the applause is familiar rather than explosive? In the final chapter, we will step beyond charts and stages entirely. We will explore the internal dimension, the quiet reflections of a man who built his life in public, yet guarded his essence with care. When the bright years of momentum settle into steady light, a different kind of evaluation begins. Not from critics, not from charts, from within. Clint Black's career, when viewed from a distance, reads like a classic arc: breakthrough, turbulence, expansion, legacy. But the deeper measure of his life is not how many #1 singles he recorded. It is how consistently he remained aligned with himself. Country music has always valued authenticity, but authenticity is easy to perform and harder to sustain. Sustaining it requires boundaries. It requires knowing what not to chase. It requires accepting that cultural waves rise and fall, and that not every wave needs to be ridden. Clint understood that. He never disappeared. He never detonated his own legacy for attention. He simply moved at a pace that reflected maturity rather than urgency. Touring continued, but selectively. Interviews continued, but thoughtfully. Creative work continued, but without noise. And in doing so, he preserved something many artists lose: peace. Marriage remained central. His partnership with Lisa Hartman Black endured in an industry where endurance is rare. Family life became less a sidebar and more a foundation. Fatherhood was not a press strategy. It was an anchor. As the music business accelerated into social media cycles and viral trends, Clint never attempted to become louder than the algorithm. He remained grounded in storytelling, the slow craft of 3-minute truths. There is a lesson there. Because the greatest transformation in his story was not from unknown artist to star. It was from ambition to awareness. Early in his career, the question may have been, can I make it? Later, it became, can I keep integrity intact? And that evolution is universal. For listeners who discovered him in 1989, life has also evolved. Careers have changed. Children have grown. Priorities have shifted. When they attend his concerts now, they are not just revisiting songs. They are revisiting chapters of their own lives. And that is legacy, not streams, not sales, connection across decades. Clint Black's journey reminds us that fame is an event, but character is a practice. The hits were milestones, the lawsuits were lessons, the awards were affirmations, but the quiet continuity, that was the achievement. He never needed a public collapse to find humility. He cultivated it without spectacle, and perhaps that is the most underappreciated victory of all. Because in an era obsessed with dramatic arcs and viral moments, Clint Black's story offers something steadier, a model of growth without self-destruction, of evolution without abandonment, of success without losing center. The greatest role he ever played was not the cowboy on stage. It was the man who learned how to remain whole while the world watched. And for those who have followed his music for decades, the takeaway is gentle but powerful. The legacy is not the song, it is the becoming. If this story resonated with you, consider sharing in the comments what Clint Black's music meant during a specific season of your life. Sometimes the most enduring stories are the ones we carry quietly until we choose to remember them together.